with great pleasure that I introduce Donald Cohen tonight as our speaker. He's been a fierce defender of democracy for apparently over 4 decades, including leading the California universal healthcare movement 3 decades ago. He's also an influential author. Please put a comment in the chat if your league or other book group has discussed his book that he wrote with Alan McKillian, The Privatization of Everything: How the Plunder of Public Goods Transformed America and How We Can Fight Back. If you haven't read this, borrow it from your local public library and learn how libraries, one of our extraordinary public goods, are being attacked by privatization as we speak. In 2009, Donald founded In the Public Interest, a national nonprofit research and policy organization that studies public goods and services. It helps community organizations, advocacy groups, public officials, researchers, and the general public understand how the privatization of public goods impacts service quality, democracy, equity, and government budgets. It's an amazing resource for advocates like League members who wish to strengthen and fund local, state, and federal governments so that they work for all of us. Now, most of you know we're trying at the National Convention in Columbus, Ohio, to update the National League's privatization position. Donald's book provided key insights during Vermont's study of privatization. And let us be clear that while many of us supporting the update focus our advocacy on healthcare, and that the update makes it explicit that healthcare is a public good, and it allows us to oppose further privatization of healthcare, which is our most privatized public good. But the update is not solely, or even most importantly, about healthcare. The League needs a position that helps us oppose the dangers of privatization writ large, across the full extent of public goods. The update explicitly supports accountability for entities that fail to serve the public by failing fiduciary responsibility when controlling public goods. Donald's definition of privatization and public goods seems to me to be fully compatible with the League's definitions, but a whole lot simpler and easier to remember. Donald defines privatization as private control of and power over public goods. And he defines public goods as things we all depend on, essential services. Now, Donald and I spoke in January, and he was extremely generous with his time and expertise advising on our advocacy strategy for convention. From my experience, Donald embodies Horace's definition of a good teacher, someone who both instructs and delights. He's the teacher, colleague, comrade in arms, to whom we return time and again because even when his topics are about harm and difficulty, his lessons give us courage. Thank you, Donald. Go ahead.
Wow. I don't know what to say, Judy. Like the real Judy. So, so let me say two things. First, Suzanne Steinbeck from Sudbury, don't necessarily, wait till you hear me talk before you decide to bring my book to the, to your book group. Just, you may not like it. And then Judy, since you actually stole some of what I was going to say, I'm going to expand on it. So my definition of public goods is private control over public goods. My definition of public good, I'm going to expand on that you just said. It's a three-part definition. I was going to do this later. The first, it's the things we all need to survive, to thrive, to get through the world: healthcare, clean air, education and knowledge, access to the internet now. It's clearly, we all need it. That's the first part of the definition. It's kind of what you said. The second part, it's the things that we need everyone to have, even if we don't need it. Even if you don't have children's, it's in our democratic interest, our economic interest, and our personal interest for every child to be educated. So we need everyone. During COVID, the health of all of us depended on the health of each of us, right? So that's the second part. The third part of the definition is If we believe all is all and everybody should have the public goods, then we can only accomplish them if we do them together. And that's through public institutions. So that's the three-part definition, Judy. So I'll just leave
No,
it
but
there.
that's fabulous. It's still easier than the leagues, tell you that.
You know, I try to, I'm an organizer. I try to do things quick and short. All right, so let me start. And I did recently this book came out, God, 5 years ago, 21, I think. And I haven't done book talks, but I just did one recently to the Orange County, California League of Women Voters. I live in Los Angeles. I am right now in North Carolina at the home, I mentioned earlier to some folks, of Nancy McLean, who wrote a book called Democracy in Chains. If you don't, you should check that book out as well. It's kind of amazing. It's a little older as well. She's a close friend I'm visiting. So let me start by telling three stories that the thank you, Linda. Um, that I think illustrate some of the larger issues, right? And we wrote the book, the idea was we told a lot of stories, but the idea was the overarching frame was to lift up some ideas like about democracy and public goods. The first story, and some of you may know this if you read the book, or if you didn't, or you live anywhere near Chicago. In 2008, I've told this story a gazillion times. In 2008, at the depth of the Great Recession, everybody in trouble, cities bleeding red ink. On a Friday, the mayor of Chicago, it was Daley at the time, announced a proposal from a private consortium that included Morgan Stanley, investment firm, a national investment firm called Sovereign Wealth Funds from one of the Middle Eastern countries, and a national parking company, LAZ Parking, which we all park in, they're all over the country. Their proposal was, and on a Friday, was they will give the city $1.16 billion upfront in exchange for the city's control of the city's 36,000 parking meters for 75 years. So that's till 2083. I don't know about you, but I'm not going to be driving then. But nobody's going to, I mean, we don't know if anyone's going to be driving then. Incredibly stupid deal. But, desperate governments do desperate things. Propose it on a Friday, they vote on it on a Tuesday, a deal's a deal. Still a deal. What became clear afterwards, because there was no analysis, no investigation, no scrutiny, no public testimony, none of that. Nobody knew what this complicated deal was. What they learned out, the Inspector General did a study, the PERG in Illinois did a study, and others. What they found were two things. One is, even if this was like the only solution to not lay off half the city in a terrible time, and they had to do it, they sold $1 billion too cheap. Just on the numbers, they got taken. But that's not important. What's important is that if the city still wants to eliminate parking spots, either temporarily for a street fair or permanently for dedicated bus lines or a pedestrian mall, essentially, or anything where they want to change the number of spots, they have to buy the spots back. So if that's the case, I mean, there will be the city council can't do its fundamental. What does the city do? Land use, housing, environment, economic development. Their hands are tied, and in many cases, they won't even make the proposal to do the things because it costs too much money. Because the city has, put their interests locked, the private interests, tightly connected and a little bit over the city's interest. And a contract's a contract. That's number one. The point being, it's about democracy. It's about it, literally not just whether you vote or not, it's whether we have control, whether we have democratic control over our cities, our counties, our school boards, et cetera. And the contracts lock in private interests into that. Second example is about weather. So you may AccuWeather is one of the big private weather companies, and we probably some of us have AccuWeather apps on our phone, and we see it on TV. They're a big company, and this was in like 2015, I think. There was a tornado. I always forget, but I think it's Oklahoma in the summer of 2016, say, or 2015. The AccuWeather had contracts with big companies to provide extra services. 'Cause remember, all the satellites for the weather are public. They're publicly owned satellites, but they make the data available, and companies then process it, and they can do other things. Some legitimate, some maybe not. Let's just set that aside. So this is what. So the company Union Pacific, a cargo rail company, had used AccuWeather services for. And here's what the CEO of AccuWeather said on TV about the success of his service during the tornado. I just want to read the quote. First, he says, two trains stopped 2 miles apart. They watched the tornado go between them. This is me now. It's, they got earlier warning or they did something. But then going back to him, he said, unfortunately, I went into a town that didn't have our service and a couple of dozen people were killed, but the railroad did not lose anything. Their client, their customer. The point of that story is that markets, right? You put something on the market, markets exclude. If something's in the market, the people who have money can buy the thing, but if people would not have money, can't buy the thing. Those poor people in that town who died didn't have the service. We should have invested in our services high enough so that would have happened. So that's about the failure of markets to provide public goods. The third example is Medicaid in Iowa. This is again a little while pre-COVID, so data may be a little out of date. They privatized their Medicaid, in Iowa, and they gave it to 3 different companies. It was a complicated thing. And of course, what the proposers said and the governor, the people who made it happen, they're going to save a lot of money for the state. Okay, and this is often what they say when they're proposing privatization. It's cheaper, it's better, faster, we're going to save money, we're going to get more innovation and better service. So I want to go over some math, general math. No, a private company, and I looked at the numbers for some of these companies. United Health was one of them, back then. I looked up the executive compensation, top 5 executives, and this is in 2020. No, let's Anthem. This is one of. No, I'll say with United Health. The top 7 executives in United Health made $219 million between 2018 and 2020. That's $219 million. It's a fair amount. Maybe they work hard. Okay. Then they have their publicly traded companies. They have, returns to investors. It's I have, my 401ks in the stock market, money to investors. They have debt service because they're always buying up other companies and they take on lots of debt and you have to pay the debt back, So they have lobbying and campaign contributions. They have, these are all business expenses. You can evaluate whether they're legitimate or not. So if you're going to do it cheaper, provide health care for poor, for low-income folks that Medicaid isn't designed to do, and you're going to take off a few $100 million off the top, then you have to actually pay less for something. And and the only thing you can pay less for when you're providing health care is health care. And that's exactly what happened. The denial rates went up, the process for denial for insurance claims went up, less healthcare was given, and they didn't save anywhere near that kind of money, even with that. So that's the point there, is they'll say more efficient, and we'll say, okay, what does that look like? Because I call it extraction. You're extracting a lot of money. Maybe they're legitimate business expenses, but that money's it's being taken out of the service, the provision of the service, which we all care about. So okay. So those are the 3 core ideas, I think, in this book. There may be 1 or 2 others. I'll get to them. So I want to put the privatization in context just a little bit. Privatization, I've written on this. The privatization, I think, was and is a key element of a now maybe 50 to 60-year assault on government, on both the institution of government and the idea of government, that are public things. So, and there are a few pieces of that. So first of the idea of government, right? And these will all resonate with all of us. These are the ideas that have become popular culture. Government is inherently efficient and wasteful, right? This is all, it's in the air. Number 2, government serves someone else, not you. If you remember during Reagan's period about, welfare queens, That's who government serves, people who have, women who have Cadillacs on welfare, if you remember the images back then. And the third, of course, is that the market and market competition can better meet our needs. These are ideas that they have been hammering on for decades, and there's probably some others, but that have really become part of popular conventional wisdom. Then there's the battle, that's the battle of ideas, and the battle over the institutions, the dismantling of the institutions is first, get control of the legislators, the courts, and the federal government, which sort of, I don't need to say any more about that right now. I'm in North Carolina. This is a red state. I'm sure some of you are in red state as well, with a Democratic governor, but who, they have the legislature is a supermajority. They can veto anything. I mean, they can override any veto. So that's one, get control. Second is cut taxes, defund, eliminate public services. Been happening. It's kind of on steroids right now. And then, the make us individuals in the market, which when you eliminate services, you're making us individuals in the market to meet our needs, right? That's privatization, right? If it is not a public service, if the public good is not a public service and we need it, or at least those of us, those who can afford it, you're in the market, you're looking for your thing. And that's both an idea on their side and it's a reality. And on the politics of this, it all becomes sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. The decline of people really don't like the government when you talk about it that way, right? Government, bad. I'm not sure they think corporations good right now, but they do think government bad at a general level. But if their success in turning people away from government means that you can't raise money to provide quality services, which means people are their discontent is directed at government, which means you can cut more taxes and you can, it erodes. So that's that's kind of been what's been. I mean, I have a 60-page booklet. I'm happy to, Barbara, I'll send you the PDF of it, or if I can find it here, I'll put it in the chat about that. But privatization is a big piece of that. If you move things to the market, to private sector, people rely on the private sector, not the government, not the public sector. Just, I want to, yeah, agreed, Marita. It's worth saying who's driving this. And this is, again, these are my analysis. One is because I think I see three primary forces that are driving the privatization. One is true believers, ideologues, who really believe the market's a better instrument to provide things. They're true believers. I respect it. I disagree with it, but they really believe it, and they have intellect, and they're not necessarily self-interested. They really are believers. Second is, corporations, right? Who, they're conveniently conservative. The federal government, I haven't done these numbers in a bit, but before COVID, there are $7 trillion spent every year in government, state, local, all the above. It's probably now 12. I just haven't done the numbers. And so if you're a big company, private company, whose job it is to sell stuff, that's it. That's all they do is sell stuff. Where do you follow the money. And so corporations is a huge interest in privatization there because they get a piece of it. And then the final driving piece, and this is all, there's soft boundaries between these, is the political class who want to weaken public sector unions. They want to kill the teachers union. They want to kill, they want to weaken the Democratic Party. They want conservative political control, permanent conservative political control. The Grover Norquist of the world, the Karl Rove, if we remember him, and then what's his name? Bannon. But there's a political class that, and they're all interrelated. Okay, so the next thing I was going to do was define privatization, which I won't do because Judy did a spoiler. It's fine. So I want to talk about, and if people do have questions, put them in the chat. Because I'm actually looking at the chat, so if I could, and I'm happy to incorporate them if it's about what I'm saying right now. So don't hesitate. So four key ideas, some of this will be a little bit repetitive. So one is there's a difference between public and private interests. Private interests embedded in public things weaken democracy. And I want to clarify, Pri private interests are legit. But what private interests are is they want to make money. They want to sell things and make money. That's what they want to do. There's nothing wrong with it. We all buy stuff. Some of us sell stuff. Okay, but that's what they do. It's just not necessarily in our interest because they want to sell stuff. We want to make sure people have what they need. The problem, of course, is that those interests can collide. In Chicago, they collided, as the story I said, right? You know, when they gave it over to the parking meters. Private prisons, private prisons have, they benefit they make money when there are heads in beds, when there are people in prison, right? So for many years, they've backed off because it had bad optics. For many years, they were lobbying for 3 strikes you're out, higher mandatory sentencing for drug offenses and all of that sort of stuff, because it is in their objective economic interest to pay their shareholders to have more people in prison. That's an absolute clash of interest. We just have to be real clear about that. So then that's idea number one. Idea number two is there's more than one kind of efficiency. I'm a little bit obsessed with the notion of efficiency because I hear it all the time. Oh, but the private sector is so much more efficient. And here's the thing. I think there's 2 kinds of efficiency. One is smart and one is extractive. Okay, smart efficiency is we figure out how to do something better, right? We come up with a new idea or a new thing, a new gadget that helps us do something quicker and faster or better and more efficient, whatever. But what's important to understand about efficiency is essentially mathematically, but not really math, is efficiency is less in, whether it's money or time, for more out. Okay? That's just really what we mean by efficiency. We're going to do less, we're going to spend less, and we're going to do better. So we just ask and I hear all the time, and I say, but let's just break that down a little bit. Okay, you're going to spend less on something. It's more in for less, it's less in. Okay, so the less in part means you're going to spend less on something. Tell us exactly what you're going to spend less on, because it's finite what you can spend less on. Now, maybe a new idea, great. We could buy that from a private company. But in a private prison, it's fewer corrections officers, which they do. Fewer corrections officers makes more dangerous prisons. They can pay the corrections officers less. Also, incentive, if you're making low wages and you're in a prison, it would be tempting to get extra money to bring in drugs. This is not about any individual. The nurse or the doctor could come in once every other week rather than once or twice a week. So it's fine. Or you could have crappier food, which has happened as well. Michigan and Ohio a number of years ago found maggots in the food. It was outsourced to one of the companies, Aramark, I think. So that's efficiency I say this over again. When you hear that, ask one question. Tell us what you're going to spend less on, because it may not be in our interest. The third idea is we are both citizens and consumers. The right wing wants to turn us, the privatizers want to turn us into consumers. That's as our core identity. But I'm saying we're consumers. I get it, but we're also citizens. We know what it means to be a consumer. You're meeting your individual needs when you're consuming. But citizens, in my definition of public goods, we need to be responsible to meet everybody's needs, right? We are responsible to one another, whether we want to believe that or not, right? If someone, during the COVID, if someone did not mask up when they needed to mask up and created a super spreader event, that person failed in their responsibility to the rest of us, right? That's a democratic responsibility in that kind of narrow case. There is a real fundamental difference between those things. And then finally, the core idea is that the market's the wrong tool to deliver public goods. Now, this is different from not saying that you can't hire a private company, contract with a private company to do some of them. That happens as long as you do it right. Okay, in concept. So few parts of that. Competition is what makes market work. We know this. We've grown up with it. It's real. We compete. We just bought a car. My wife and I just bought a car. It was one company competing against another. We know about this. And so it can definitely have a positive impact on things. But here's the problem. It also creates incentives to manipulate the market. I'm going to give an example of charter schools. Some of you may have, some of you don't have. So charter schools are publicly funded, privately operated schools. In every state, they're different, a little different. And the original idea of charters was to create kind of laboratories of innovations, come up with new ideas, and then share those and spread those throughout the educational system to benefit. That was the idea 30 years ago, something like that. Unfortunately, it's kind of different. So now charter schools are competing with each other and with public district schools, right? So that the idea being the parents will choose the better school. I have grandkids now. I have kids. We chose schools, and my grandkids choose schools. And so the market-oriented idea is that parents will choose, the good schools will succeed and the bad schools will fail. They will close. I mean, it's just like a restaurant would, right? That's the market. That's how the market works. I mean, there's obviously a problem with that. We don't have to talk a lot about that. But let me be more specific. So charter schools are legally, they're all required to take all students. Anti-discrimination laws are all in the books. But it's not, but they use a lot of schemes to keep kids out. They call them creaming and cropping. Creaming is like, this is really not the school for you. You should, to take the easier to educate kids, for a simple way to say that. Or cropping is move kids out that are hard to teach, that have disabilities, or they have behavior issues or whatever, move them out. Now, the reason for that, again, when you're in a competitive market, one of the things parents look at are the test scores of a school, right? I mean, you probably look at other things. You look at a test. So the kids that are harder to educate, that are more expensive to educate, that for whatever reason bring the test scores down, hurt the school in a competitive situation. They make it harder, they bring down their stats. In New York City, a charter school chain, I don't remember the name. It's Eva Moskowitz. Anybody in New York will know her. Runs them. So the New York Times did an investigation, found on a principal's desk a got to go list, literally, of the kids that they had to get rid of and send back to the district school. So that's the problem with markets. You want to, you basically want to, you want the most of, you want the folks that can pay the most, can do the best, and all that for your competitive situation. And then the other part of the markets is competition depends on secrecy. You don't tell, this one company doesn't tell the other company what their secret sauce is. But, charter school, I'll stay there. Charter school curriculum, I mean, yeah, curriculums, charter schools think they're trade secrets, that they cannot be shared. There are teachers' contracts that we had found that have do not, what are the NDAs, that they're not allowed to share. They're not, if they move to another school, the curriculum and the lesson plans and all that. That's the problem with markets. So I think it's important to get the larger ideas about these things, because we could get into the weeds on any one little thing. So yeah, that's what I meant. Thank you, Barbara. Non-disclosure clauses. I knew there was something else. So I just want to pause for a second to see if there's, questions, and I can talk about a few other things, but I think I want to get to questions, because I could go into any one sector and talk for a long time about water. I mean, the book's called Privatization of Everything because it is. It's water, it's schools, I mean, I can't, literally everything,